Cast into the innards of the protecting forest, we sorted through our predicament, left with no option but to head deeper. We roamed freely. The wave had left us scattered and aimless. My innate tendency toward greater heights guided me up, and near the rim I met first signs of the others. The remains of a campsite fire. I picked through the scorched logs and discovered clear cuts, an indication for tools and handy skill to use them. Casting my view down the jungle valley, I searched the track to follow, but found none. I decided to set up camp in a tree. A wide fork offered plenty of space, so my shelter turned out rather nice and comfortable. In the west, through the veil of fog and night, a shimmer appeared. Certain now that I would reach company soon, sleep drifted me into recalibration. The jaguar awoke me. I clenched my spear, but met no danger. Monkeys howl in the distance, and the chirping of early morning jungle set the mood. I looked around. West and into the island my path led. Past many broken branch I grew in confidence to catch up soon. Lightly I skipped over roots and vines, ants and the rivers, until I reached a cave. Curiosity, yes, but no recklessness I felt, so all I did was to scan. Bats came flapping above my head, a fresh breeze drifted through, and I was ignited to go deeper. Beams of sunlight flooded the entrance hall through a roof of rooted basalt. Damp the smell and mossy boulders, an emerald atmosphere. I knew this to be a deeply tunneled system, yet past the cave mouth reached no heaven, so I stayed in the dim daylight. I found no sign of disturbance inside. By stacking some flat rocks against the wall, I left my own indicator, and then I went on. These symbols of mindful construction soon led me deeper into what seemed to be an outward spread habitat. Met up with my companions, it became easy then to read the directions, and we ascended what would come to be a wide, open civilization. The tribe we encountered had great sophistication in building above ground. Freed from the cold wild, we were eager to step into the chief's hut to be introduced, all 4 of us. We had been picked up at the rim from a tent up high, and the tribe's children accompanied us giggling. A tight-woven table sat on the floor, and around it lay pelts for sitting. Bright sunlight shone through high open windows to illuminate the colorful room. We were gestured to sit with the chief. Next to him, silent and deep, the shaman watched closely. We were given a small hut near the forest floor, in fact just one layer above it, set on stilts, and it was just a single room. 4 mattresses of goat's wool filled with hay lay on dry wood, calling their soft, warm welcome. We each unpacked our belongings into the single wooden chest. Firestones, knives, and an axe of obsidian were the tools at hand. The 2 girls lay toward east, and us men at west. A well-deserved sleep under a dry roof was to be. Next day, I visited the shamanic complex, a series of comically various housings ranging from highest treetop netscapes to a solid rock well into the ground. Ladders and stairs, hanging bridges and multiple balconies and platforms bowed the most phenomenal view across the village and beyond. The shaman was not to be seen, yet movement, lights, and busy monkeys gestured me toward a high tent. I began my ascent up the trees, across a hanging bridge, and into the canvas cave. Across from the shaman, I sat down. Into the evening long we meditated. Sceneries faded by us noisily, and we sat. Up stood the man, and I followed. Up a ladder into the next level, from where he lit a fire. In a stone bowl he sent it down a narrow slide, and into a strong hut below. Into my hand he placed a similar stone. I could feel his curiosity. He then vanished into the night. My path was clear, to follow the fire. Stairs I went down and into the hut. Inside I found a hall and a long table. The shaman's fire had reached the head of the hall and had been lit into a series of chandeliers. Men and women of the tribe sat at the table and they sang. Silently I joined the gathering. My stone I had placed onto a desk at the entrance. The song grew mellow and rolled outward. Then a younger shaman stepped up to enrich it. He became jaguar, and on the table he danced. On all fours he approached the side of the table and growled. At me he sneered. I roared back at him. We connected. Returned to our hut in the deep, I let the silence embrace me. From my stone I decided to carve a figurine of my snoring companions, lulled me into a dream. We were two in the hut as I awoke. The girl I left to sleep, but I roamed not far. The wet forest floor felt good on bare soles. I found plump blueberries and followed them a little deeper into the shrubbery. A smelly swamp opened ahead of me, just a spread of circular puddles begrown with purple moss and active with lively quacking. I skimmed the range and tread the rings to familiarize myself with the territory when I found the jaguar. Only a few footprints, but unmistakably those of the big cat. They seemed a day old, and they drew some loops before vanishing. The decision to move our housing higher was made when I told the group then of my findings. Moving our location just a little up would not suffice. The incentive to climb a considerable margin was given by the strong main branch of the tree that shaded us. We agreed not to disrupt the local flora as far out as to the swamp, when we now cut our first tree there. As the axe was raised for the swing, a growling roar stopped us, fierce. From above dropped the young shaman. Back at the chief's hut, we presented our need for an expansion of home. Disregarded for our hubris, we were put into place. Make this your home, and you will soon sleep wherever you are invited. We were handed over to a smooth fellow by the name of Onward, who was to show us around. Both girls were swiftly sent off down to where the village women did their daily weaving. No protest against sexual stereotyping was made from our position. Us two men were given a choice in the multitude of occupations. A builder's work opposed the job of a hunter. Onward gestured me down a slope and onto a gravel-tread road. This road I followed. Opening up ahead of me were wide planar slopes. The trees stood rare and impressive, towering to oversee what was to transform into a sandstone valley. Cut surfaces, clear swipes, and geometric boulders called the impression of creative intervening. The rock face lay down at the concrescence. I could hear the workings of a crew. At the gate, I was greeted by a watchman. He came down his platform sliding on loose pebbles. Like a sniffing dog, he inspected me from all sides. He whistled to call a sister. Maline's dark skin glistened in the sunlight. Her single thick braid hit me as she turned to lead me into the mountain. I hopped onto a higher parallel walkway down the corridor. Skipping over cracks and other obstacles had my attention grounded. Maline gestured me to pass her. Into a great eastern opening I walked. Busy like ants, dozens of men went on carving, caving, cutting, and stacking. The molding of the temple was directed by no apparent guide other than the veins of the rock itself. With a jug of water from the handout table, I stood refreshed. My eyes scanned the outer edge and the lower layer. At suggestion of Maline, who released me forward, I spoke to a square of sweaty younglings. Newcomers like me, I found out. Barely a month of carving, and they proudly presented their ship. One of many openings, similar in shape, but individuated from the inside. The four guys had started their staircase eagerly around the first granite column they had unveiled. To reach the temple's second layer was to be introduced to new techniques and to gain respect among the workers. Windy, the gnarly trees sang a mindful melody to guide me along the narrowing path. Fading into the woods was the rocky road now to transform into a series of branches. One road with many angles, as the dust and sand led me over heightened roots. Held there by woven twigs and dirt and earth overgrown with moss, so flew and hang, so rose and dove, so move a widespread labyrinth. Sandstone platforms, gnarly gateways, open glade, saw sunlight beaming, fruits and berries and a flower, as I met the crystal child. Awoken by a kiss on the cheek by Maddalena, my lover for some few weeks, I stretched, yawned, and moved about. The day would hold many of surprises. Out I swung onto the platform below to land softly on morning dew-wet moss. Excitedly blabbering, many of the children of the treetop town joined me. Sliding on the wet wood, I reached the bottom planks to meet up with my team. There were Leia and Linda, the two girls with whom we had originally arrived, and then came Admilan with his two sons. The children who had accompanied me waited up on the balcony, watching. because they were not allowed down here. Each day we started from this trough to reach whatever part of the structure we were required at climbing. Maddalena swung in then to catch me off. Barely had I reached the second tent, there she came and took me by the hand to lead me away and into a different, undiscovered part of the woods. A sweet, swampy scent told us just how far we had strayed. Tight grew the foliage here, foggy the air, and the moss had purple flowers. Maddalena grabbed and silenced me. We grew closer to a concrescence. She turned to tiptoe across a wide branch, and she opened a window through the leaves. There lay, safe and protected, some layers beneath us, a baby cub jaguar nurtured by his mother. Maddalena looked at me. I turned my eyes not from the scene. The window closed. Back we were on our mossy branch, and the lady held my hand. A kiss I breathed on her neck. Then we did our silent retreat. Back at the gnarly tents we split. She went for her sisters, and I climbed the big tree of our project. Admilan called me. He sat weaving his sapling baskets, another invention of his, and he complained to be rid of this disturbance while doing his precise work. He gestured around to the children watching. Gladly I took them off him, and they followed me up. At nightfall we sat around the planar circles, woven with twigs, held there by elevated roots, and connected by the vines of the great soul of the project. These platforms grew and moved with the wind. Linda played a song on the fairy bayonet. With it she sent us, sailing into mindscapes far beyond the simple jungle. The rivers of time extended, tunneling through crowded netscapes. Cast our mind as cloudlet shimmers, cast the mind and make it roll. As silent grew the crystal drakes drops in the bowl, a simple seed. Off that road, in a far dampened sphere, a colder stone-etched, shoveled castle. Great excitement for the play, enthusiasts of ash and fire lining up and brawling. We walk the corridors with our glass goblet in hand, still unscathed. Out of these heated, cramped and foggy halls, tunneling the masses through the roads that were a town and been made a labyrinth, pointed simply by the street folk toward a place beyond the walls, following past bridges, darkened river as a light, lined up still at castle side gates, rally scouts and scoundrels up to their shoulder in a ditch, the workers. Noisy and hard they cut wood and lay clay. Hollow and stiff a new extension is built of walkways and sidewalks. Just a peek in their tunnel, just a glance at the door, but the entrance is only for firemen. So we follow the scoundrels, so we walk up the stairs, and the room just vaguely familiar. At the walls sit and cuddle bright, yet aimless, the souls that so wondrous managed to get here. I sit down and take out my one flower and eat it, the hungry folk curiously watching. Getting up at first daylight to the crow of a rooster, I felt drawn back to visit the old temple of stone. Alone I followed once again the gravel road. Past the greeting of the watchman, I went into the mountain. Etched in the walls of this first rugged tunnel were geometrical patterns. Only scrabbles, but they got more elaborate toward the great hall. Bright morning sun and the familiar clonking noisy rumble pulled me in, and I saw nothing. Nothing familiar at all. Since I'd been last here, the entire place had undergone a rapid transformation. Wide slopes rolling up to what used to be a narrow second level, and now shot out from an archway-rich backdrop as some center-glimpsing balcony. Leading up to it, the lower layers had merged to release the workers to craftsmen. I looked up, like the multi-layered star seen drawn on the walls. The pattern as a whole began to emerge. I jumped out of the way of 5 strong men who were carrying a big slab of sandstone down to a sorted pile. My eyes went scanning for Malinee. Rare had our interaction been, and yet I knew that I needed her charging attitude for the mission. I found her darting around the boulders as usual. I took the ramp up to the second floor and waited around the prime balcony for her to notice me, with little success. I felt called to attendance when I saw 2 younglings working their strength off at a boulder they were trying to split. I intervened and shed light on their misplaced veg. After some readjustment and then some warming up, I showed off my skill to drive the cut through the stone. My heel hit the wedge, and the boulder gave way, split in 2. Years of carving, caving, and tunneling, yet never had Malinee conceived of a strike like this. Among the men of the mountain she had earned the reputation of a crusher like no other. She coordinated the strikes of many. She shaved the inners of the gondola. She knew the ores and the veins of the stone, and how they would shatter, and where they would crumble, and why all the fuss and the sweat and insistence on precision. But this strike of this man, and his swirl and the swing and his natural swiftness was new. I caught her glimpse as she soared by, turned once without stopping, and she tilted her head. I zoomed in on her backside. Many more hours then I played with the younglings to show them to do the waves shatter. Malinee moved forward then, curious to see me. So we went up. I pulled her with me, eager to tell her of our world, to show her whence and how and where and why and when we really are. The canyon mountain's peak we climbed, saw, kissed by dusk the valley, and down the slopes and off the plains beyond the fields of stones, a river. It slithered from the northern range through steep and narrow cliff sides, but came from above where wide and tough spelt down a mighty glacier. There I told her to mindfully follow the river and imagine her crossing the forest, and she'd reach the place where the mighty wave had unannounced shattered my past. We moved down toward opposite layers. I returned to my peers, while Malinee stayed to reflect upon what I had shown her. Was she ever to follow us into the waves' desolation? Down river the jungle and away from her homeland? She'd have to move up first. Some stranger with a story I was to call her to darkness? A stranger with mind, though, a player with soul. She felt me as we connected. The lure of adventure, once glimpsed from her steady plateau, had seized her to nudge her back to me, but counter directly, and not as to follow. Her way went not downstream, but up hills, to connect with her roots first, to find among glacial lakes, tundras, and snow the ancients. In the new circle we noisily scattered our plannings. Parchment was crumbled, canvas torn down, and revealed the naked wood planks. This first hut of ours we knew to be misfit, and we wished to delete it ourselves. Hard crashed obsidian axe on the stilts, and the simple box soon was dismantled. What remained in the rubble, found under a mattress, forgotten for months, and returned just in time, there was the stone that which gave me the shaman. It had been cracked. A simple seed was going to split it. I carried it back to the shaman in his brightly colored canvas cave. Dangling from the ceiling, as in hover, stood a lamp of carved obsidian. A blue shimmer shone from it, and another swung in orange. Draped around columns of wood, and webbing into the open portals to all sides, there hang cascades of translucent fabric. I scanned for the shaman, old man wise, deep-voiced and purring, his presence intruded from far off, but strongly. I stepped toward a staircase in search of a viewpoint. Before my toes could even touch it, though, I was repelled by a wind blast. Just a breeze, a light shiver, still enough, though, to stop me. At another angle, I moved down instead. On a slim ropeway, I took my stone with me to cross over well-vined branches, and they would carry me toward a platform. This concrescence had pulled me. I recognized the patterns. Held there by nature's spirit's wingtips, fresh earth on a soft womb of forest. Into the center I placed and I covered my stone with just the first leaf tips to show. Off then I swung, off the platform, and onward I swung until I reached solid ground. From there I could tell how throughout the whole complex grew up earthen houses and came down many routes. There I conceived that my path would go solo. My way back to shore was to share with none else. I went with light baggage. A seed from the soul tree was my most weighted gift. A bag of edible flowers and a jug for water would suffice. My light boots tread safely on any surface, and a woolen coat kept me warm. I meant to do my retreat silently. Too much planning clouds the waters, which is why my current mood I did not wish to alter by saying farewell. A fresh breeze in my hair and a skip in my step, I went south. Familiarity with my surroundings would soon fade, but I knew well how to walk by sun and star guides. Within 3 days I gladly watched the dense foggy jungle turn to more arid climate. From a long range I witnessed a waterspout roaring through dry pine wood. Heavy wind drove me to find shelter in a cave mouth. Curiously I stood to observe a family of wild boars cuddling against a tree trunk. Noisy and cold, the rain crashed on my roof. I sat down. No fire I could make that night. Instead I went deeper. One last look, while a lightning strike showed me my sleep space. and into this dirt bed I shivering slept. Ferns and tall grass stood to lead my way over fallen, rotting tree trunks full of moss, carved by the storm on top of old pine wood, freshly felled and dripping wet, to raise by roots the ground a cavern, giant spruces. A mighty slice the elf had taken. Walking at the borders of whence the tornado had spawned, its voice became apparent. Not only was the valley cleared of rubble, carved off too, bent, stacked, and stolen, all the tight and tiny trees that had once stood, ordered in a self-suffocating mass of homogeneity. Through low-hanging cloud fragments, swiftly sailing by, the sun shone and beamed. A narrowing path on the edges came quickly to lead me toward the hill slopes. Rolling over the widening range, a grassland. Thunder, then, as a herd of wildebeests, white-pelted, fierce, horned, and enormous, as by the call of the wind, or scent, by instinct maybe, or guided, they flew by my hill. Into the wake of their rumble I stepped, and confronted the druid. A long gnarled staff as high as 2 men he held like a standard, and waved it to whistle. The seashell on top soared by, singing, and from its tone gathered the herd to surround us. They bellowed and grunted, snarled at me, and stomped on the ground. The druid thrust his staff into the dirt. He came closer, and the cattle grew calm. They spread out to graze. Manalak was his name, a friendly cheer, an ecstatic voice, but he moved as smooth as a river. His mistress and him, they invited me into their housing. Carved by hand, a dozen serpents ran across the oakwood gate. No railing connected the fence. Instead, the cattle was held back by their own sheer size. Only the young animals could thread their horns through the tightening net of vertical pylons. And they were of no threat to the fragile herb garden side. A girl in the nude came to take the druid's mantle. Without his orange fur coat, his tense muscles were contrast to his fluid manner. The tents that were dotted across the habitat bore the style of the hills, like miniature cave mouths, hung with leather curtains and overgrown with the flowers of the field. They stacked toward a cap at cliff. Speedy rodents were hopping in and out of their own holes, chased by the children. Into his own home I went with the druid. Manalak complimented me through the tight entrance, and I smelled the rosemary air. His wife got up to greet me overflowingly. Only the wolf in the corner growled. Throughout the night, Manalak kept reigniting me to tell my story. With waving hands and great excitement, he animated me to once again dance the bit. Soon many villager was watching as I perfected to act out the wave. Back at the sea, with old intent and youngened heart, we tower over the boulders. Again the water crashes into shore to clear the coast of rubble. Without these wilder splashes, safety as a steady habit ceases. Once more the water retreats as sucked in by Poseidon. All of us now, with all our heart, with all our mind, and certain of nothing, we connect. We calm the ocean. Palms turn flat toward the earth, at a level where water ought to be. We stroke it, and the sea returns to us. The dreamy scene turned toward truth, as simply as existence, validated through the sparkling warmth of fading hallucinated imagery, a thought, gods and genes, a final wave. They tear to piece the connecting fabric of the vision and release us into our own imagination. Deja vu! Deja vu!